Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show. Coming up today, the National Grid spent over £200 million last year switching off wind turbines on the windiest days. That's as the energy regulator tells Sky News the grid is not yet fit for purpose. The UK would have to devote half of all its farmland to growing biofuels if Britain is to meet its plans for zero-emission flying. And new pictures of the first bison calf born wild in Britain for centuries, as she turns 6 months old. Hello and welcome to the Daily Climate Show, where we track the changes to our world and investigate some of the potential solutions to the climate crisis. Now, the National Grid is spending hundreds of millions of pounds a year paying wind generators to switch off their turbines on the windiest days. That's because Britain's electricity infrastructure isn't built for the amount of renewable electricity that it is now required to carry. Our climate and energy correspondent, Hannah Thomas-Peter, has been reporting on this story today. She's here in the studio with us. Hello, Hannah. So what is going on here?
This is one of those stories that really illustrates how difficult it is to decarbonise power generation, which we must, according to a government pledge, by 2035, and ensure continued smooth security of supply. And the fundamental problem we've got is this. We generate a lot of electricity using wind power in the north of the country, in Scotland and in the North Sea, but a lot of the demand comes from the densely populated areas in the south. To keep the lights on, the National Grid has got to move that electricity from the north to the south. And the issue is that we don't actually have enough cables to do that. We've got a real bottleneck in terms of transmission between England and Scotland. So on the windiest days, there's actually too much for those cables to handle without risking damage. So the National Grid electricity system operator has no choice but to call the turbines or to instruct the wind turbine generators to turn off their wind turbines. They pay for that, around £200 million last year. And then, of course, we have to turn on gas-powered stations closer to the location of the demand, perhaps nearer London. And that, according to one calculation using publicly available data, was around £700 million last year. Now, Renewables UK, which is the trade body for renewable power generation, has said that they've been calling for grid upgrades for years, and they are so worried about this issue that they think it could actually jeopardise our net zero targets.
I would say it's a really huge risk. I think, first of all, because we have to pay these costs, we're wasting power instead of exporting it or using it. And this is really cheap power that we're wasting. And I would also say, as an investment signal, it's not great. If you think about a developer that wants to build wind farms in the UK, they know that it's not easy to connect to the transmission system. They know there's not enough capacity. So it's a really huge non-financial barrier that we're seeing, and it's a big deterrent.
OK, Hannah, so what can they do about this?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say is this isn't a problem just restricted to wind. The National Grid pays other power generators to ramp supply up and down, depending on what's needed. But there's such a focus on wind because it's such a critical part of our energy mix, both now and into the future. And the National Grid, the energy regulator Ofgem, and the government all know that this particular issue, this transmission issue, is a real problem. There is a big plan to upgrade the grid at the cost of tens of billions of pounds. But also, we're going to need a lot more storage in the form of batteries, potentially even green hydrogen, all coming online much faster by 2030, because right now the energy regulator Ofgem has admitted to Sky News that the grid is not yet fit for purpose as we transition to this clean, green future.
OK, Hannah, thank you. Right, well, let's have a look at some of the day's other news now. And the government has announced that 3 marine habitats will receive the highest level of protection by July this year. Allenby Bay in the Irish Sea, Dolphin Head in the Eastern Channel and northeast of Farness Deep will become the first 3 highly protected marine areas in English waters. They'll be protected in an effort to reverse the impact of human activity on marine ecosystems like construction and dredging. Everyday items like bananas, coffee and chocolate could soon become harder to get your hands on due to climate change. That's according to a new report from the Fair Trade Foundation. Researchers found some of the UK's favourite foods are becoming endangered because they originate from countries that are vulnerable to threats caused by climate change, deforestation and biodiversity loss. The National Trust will use a Stone Age woodland management technique in a bid to boost nightingale numbers in Suffolk. Coppicing involves the cutting of trees close to the ground on a regular cycle. It encourages fast, new growth, which then boosts flowers and brambles, creating nesting habitats for nightingales, whose population has declined 90% in the last 50 years. The process will be used at Sutton Hoo, a woodland that was mostly felled in 1987. Now, for all the talk about sustainable aviation fuel and jet zero, you'd be forgiven for thinking the possibility of emission-free flying wasn't too far around the corner. Well, apparently not, according to a new scientific report which says there is no clear path to sustainable aviation at current levels of demand. Professor Marcel McManus is the director of the Institute for Sustainability at the University of Bath and a working group member from the Royal Society, which is the group behind this research.
We looked at 4 main different types of alternative fuels. We looked at biofuels, we looked at hydrogen, ammonia, and what we're calling e-fuels. And what we've concluded is that there's no real silver bullet. So there's no real one alternative for replacing fossil-based kerosene. Each one of these fuels has advantages, but they also have disadvantages. In the short term, what we need is something like a biofuel. We've looked at numerous biofuels, ones which are made from woody crops, and these can be quite beneficial compared with fossil fuels. But a lot of the biofuels don't necessarily meet the Renewable Energy Directive sustainable aviation fuel targets. So we need to be focusing on those that do. So those are things like the sewage or the algae or the municipal solid waste, but we can't really do that at scale yet. So we still need to put some research into that area. In the longer term, I think some of the alternatives with hydrogen and ammonia, and particularly some of these e-fuels, that's really interesting, because if we can capture carbon dioxide from flue gas or even in the future directly from the air and turn these into fuels, then we have an added benefit of dealing with carbon dioxide. One of the benefits of some of these fuels such as the e-fuels or the hydrogen or the ammonia is that they use renewable electricity to produce them. And as we go more towards having renewable electricity, as we're sort of with the energy transition, we're going to have periods of time where we have excess solar or excess wind. If we can use that to then produce a storable fuel, then that's beneficial both for our electricity supply, but also for our fuel demand. I think the most important message is that really we need to invest in a series of these different fuels, and we're not going to have one solution that fits all in order to help us meet net zero.
Just a reminder that you can catch the Climate Show with Tom Heap this weekend. He's going to be in Scotland learning all about the importance of peat and how traditional industries like whisky are facing up to the damage caused by digging it up. That's on Saturday and Sunday at 3:30 here on Sky News. And if you have a question about peat or how it's used that you'd like Tom to try and get answered on the programme, scan this QR code on your screen right now. And if you scan this QR code, you can listen to this week's edition of ClimateCast. You can listen and subscribe now wherever you get your podcast from. Just before we go, have a look at this. A bison ranger has taken photos of the UK's first free-roaming bison calf as she approaches 6 months in age. She was born in early September and was a welcome surprise to the Wilder Blean project, which is a rewilding initiative in woodland near Canterbury in Kent. They've released the free-roaming bison to shape the landscape and help make it more resilient to climate change, while also fighting the biodiversity crisis. She's cute, isn't she? Thank you so much for watching. That's all from us today. Join us again on the Daily Climate Show, same time, same place, tomorrow.